Ooh, baby, you're listening to the POW movement.
Welcome to the POW movement. I'm your host, Mike Powell, and it's getting colder out. Winter is around the corner, and you better start preparing your body. This means mixing some exercise into your 10-barrel and rescue water routine. I'm starting to think about working out now, but this year, like every year, I'll be caught unprepared, out of shape, and my legs will be killing me until January. That's just the way I roll. Someone who lives the complete opposite lifestyle of mine is my guest this week. I'm talking about the Godfather, Mike Douglas. This is the guy who drove the creation of the Salomon 1080, the Salomon Pocket Rocket, and Salomon Rocker 2 skis. He's pretty much been printing money for Salomon and skiing professionally for them for 21 years. The way this podcast is going to work is I am going to take you back to 2016 when I talked to Mike, and we're going to go through the early part of his career. We didn't do a re-interview because it would just be asking the same questions about his upbringing. So I condensed that old interview. We give you 20 minutes on Mike's upbringing, and then we jump into 45 minutes of Mike Douglas talking skiing, filmmaking, money, death, and more. Before we get into the hot podcast action, I want to ask you to follow me on Instagram and tell your friends about the podcast. I also want to thank my sponsors who make this show happen. They are Evo, Rescue Water, Outdoor Research, Spy Optic, and the 10-Barrel Brewery. Now, let's talk to the Godfather, Mike Douglas. Let's start at where you started your ski career. So where were you born and raised, and what was childhood like for a young Mike Douglas?
I was actually born in Saskatchewan, Canada, which is like being born in Kansas, I guess, is equivalent in the U.S. I have no memory of that place because my family moved out to BC, to Vancouver Island, when I was like 2. So I grew up mostly on Vancouver Island, never discovered skiing until it was a grade 5 school trip.
Wow.
I was living in a little town called Campbell River, fishing town, about an hour from this sort of local ski hill called Mount Washington on Vancouver Island, and got to go on a grade 5 school trip. Went up there, felt that sensation of sliding on snow and the adventure that came with that of cruising down this forested run that did this big long turn and wondering what was coming up around the corner. And I was like, this is the coolest thing ever. And from that first day, that was the ultimate, and that's all I wanted to do.
Your parents weren't into skiing at all?
Not at that point. They had been, when they lived back east in Canada, they skied for a couple of years, but they hadn't at that point for probably, 15 years at least since they'd really skied. But when they saw my enthusiasm for it, they decided to get the whole family into it.
Are you going skiing every weekend, or is it as often as your parents will take you?
It was pretty much a weekends thing. I would have loved to gone more, as much as possible. I remember the stress in those early years. I wanted to be on the first lift, like every morning. I wanted to be standing at the chair before it started turning. And everyone else in my family didn't really care. They were like, oh, let's make a pancake breakfast this morning. I'm like, are you kidding me? Nobody really felt the urgency that I did. But when I reached the age where my friends could start driving, we'd leave the house at 7 a.m. to make sure we were up there, ready to go for first lift.
So it took over your life.
Yep. By the time I was probably 16, I think I would be considered a pretty good skier. I was skiing a lot with my buddy Kevin Fogelin, Mark Gage, and his brothers. And Mark's brother, Greg, was a pretty talented young photographer. And so on the sunny days and whatever, Greg would bring his camera up and he would take pictures of us all doing jumps and hitting cliffs and pow turns and stuff like that. And I remember, I think I was 16, and Greg started submitting photos to Powder Magazine and just some local publications and stuff like that. And we started getting some photos published, which kind of like stoked me out. And at the same time, around that time, Greg Stump was just rising as a movie maker. And I remember like watching Warren Miller films and Greg Stump films and stuff like that. And I wanted to be Scott Schmidt. Like I thought Scott Schmidt was like the ultimate skier. And so I never really had a desire to compete, but I just wanted to hit cliffs. I wanted to be able to rip the bumps. I wanted to be just kind of the best all-around skier I could be. And I really enjoyed the whole aspect of like shooting photos. And more than anything, what I liked about that was being able to freeze those moments, like those favorite moments of my life. A photo would freeze that, and then I could just stare at it all week while I wasn't skiing and kind of put myself back there. And when I graduated from high school, I wanted to ski, and my buddy Kevin went off to Whistler. But I felt this like super strong responsibility that I needed to go to school and at least get like a year of university under my belt before I did anything fun. So I did that. And then literally like that year in university was torture. I just wanted to be in the mountains so bad. So I convinced my parents the next year, like, wanted to take a year off and go skiing. And I did. The next year I moved to Whistler, 1988, and got to Whistler. And, you know, my attitude was, I just want to make the most of this experience because it's only going to last for 6 months or whatever. At that time, I was thinking I was going to get skiing out of my system. Like, it's kind of taken over my life and all my thought patterns and everything. So let's just immerse myself in it, and I'll kind of blast it out of myself. Then I can get on with life and be a responsible person.
Yep.
So I got here in Whistler, and I contacted the local photographer who was getting shots published and said, hey, you know, if you're looking for someone to ski for you, I'd love to be involved. I started doing like the local race circuit. I met a couple of really good freestylers, Lane Barrett, B. Thomas, who were the best bump rippers on the mountain, John Smart. They got me into mogul competitions, and I just did everything that winter and had like the best year of my life by far. By the end of the season, it was like the whole freestyle skiing thing, like moguls and aerials. I ended up top 3 in both moguls and aerials for BC at the end of the season.
Whoa, in your first year.
Yeah. And I was like, whoa. And people, you know, I started meeting like people from the national team and coaches and all this stuff. And they're like, yeah, man, you got talent. You could do pretty good at this. And I was like, cool. So I actually did leave Whistler that next spring and was planning to go back to school. It actually was an accident. I didn't do it intentionally, but I was late registering for my classes for that next fall semester. And in the end, I couldn't do the stuff in school that I was interested in, and I would have had to just take a bunch of stuff that I didn't want to take, and I was paying for it myself. And I'm like, well, I'm not going to school if I can't take what I wanted to take.
Yeah.
So I told my parents, I'm like, well, I'm going to go back to Whistler for another year because I've got this competition stuff going on now, which I kind of convinced them, like, you know, I could make it to the national team and maybe even, who knows, maybe even the Olympics one day. And so I went back to Whistler, and it was awesome.
Your parents probably look at you as, oh, our son, Mike, he's a great kid. He's responsible. He's going to school. He took a year off and he's going to go back. And then when you tell them you're not going back, are they concerned?
I don't think they were, because I was giving them a good sales pitch. I went down the road of, hey, here's an opportunity for me to make the national team in skiing. And, you know, and I told them, I'm like, I can always go to school. Why don't I do this and just see where it goes, and I can go to school. And also at the time, like, you know, my parents were pretty modest income family, working class sort of family. And I was paying for everything too. My parents weren't paying for my school or anything. I was working my ass off all summer trying to make that work. So it wasn't really a drain on them. And I think they trusted me, and they were like, okay, good. Well, good luck. Yeah. And so I went back to Whistler, and I competed all the next year as a BC team member. And by the end of the season, I'd made it to the Canadian team. And then at that point, I went actually and did a 1 semester of university the following fall, but with the intention that I would just do the fall semester, and then I was out of there and going to go off, hit the mogul circuit.
When you make the team, these thoughts and dreams of what could happen, they actually start happening, and you're like, holy shit, this could be my life and be my future. And while knowing you, I'm sure you're not 100% gung-ho, this is everything, because you probably have a backup plan for everything you do. But now is the plan, I'm going to make it in skiing, and I'm going to go 110% forward, and there's going to be no regrets.
Yeah, absolutely. And when that all started happening, I was like, okay, I got this opportunity. I've got coaches, like, whoa, coach. I mean, I never had a coach before. And I didn't grow up with like Olympic dreams or anything like that. So I was in a really different place than most of the people around me who'd been competing since they were like 8 years old and been skiing since they were 2. And at this point, as a guy who just made the national team, I think I was 20 years old, and I was already old. I was already like the old guy.
That's like the story of your career, right?
It's been the story of my entire career. It's hilarious. So it was a little different, but at the same time, I was super motivated and went fully, you know, tunnel vision mode, and pretty much dedicated my life to trying to be the best mogul skier I could be for like 5 years.
Dedicating your life, how far did that get you in the world of moguls?
I was a Canadian team member. I think my best performances and results came fairly early on. I never won a major event, but I was a contender in a lot of them. I was an alternate for the Olympic team in '94, Lillehammer Olympics.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, so that was pretty cool. And what was cool about that too is we had the best team in the world. All the members of the team that went to Lillehammer were in the top 6. So Canadian team dominated. Jean-Luc Broussard won. If you're going to be on a team and not quite make it, that was the team to be on.
You go to the games?
I didn't know. I got fitted for the outfits and all that kind of stuff in the months before. But once the team left for the games, like they wouldn't sub you out the day before kind of thing. So it was like once the team had left and everyone was healthy, it was a done deal. But the crazy thing was all of us on the team were in a van literally 2 weeks before the Olympics. We were driving from Montreal to Lake Placid, New York in this classic Northeast blizzard, super icy highway, and we hit a patch of ice. Pretty sure John Smart was driving, and van goes sideways on the interstate, and we smashed into like one of those underpasses straight into the side and almost got completely obliterated by a semi that couldn't stop. Yeah, the whole team was in this van that crashed on the highway. We were all okay.
Wow.
That was like 2 weeks before the Olympics.
And the alternate, too. You would have been screwed.
Yeah, I was in the front seat. I was actually in the seat that hit the cement barrier.
Jesus. How were you as a competitor? Did you care about getting first place? Were you happy to be there? Or what did you feel like when it was time for you to drop in?
I was known as a bit of a head case, honestly. I was the guy who would like just own it in practice and then make one little mistake in his competition run. And it became really frustrating for me. So in like the last year or two of my career, it was tough. And then I got injured the Olympics year. Right after the Olympics, actually, I went off to finish off the final comps of the year and kind of tried to decide what I was going to do moving forward. You know, once moguls became an Olympic discipline, like all these things, your whole life turns into these 4-year cycles.
Yeah.
And I ended up breaking my ankle about a month after the Olympics. And I just was like, you know what? I don't want to do this for 4 more years. And the other thing was I was self-funding. And at that point, you know, there were 3 or 4 guys on the team that were better than me. And there's only a certain amount of funding that goes around.
Yep.
I was working my ass off all summer to try and pay for it all winter. After 5 years, I did that. I was just tired of being broke. Constantly being broke. And so I decided that I was going to stop mogul skiing, and I wanted to stay in Whistler. I wanted to stay in the mountains. I looked at going back to school. Actually, when I had my broken ankle, I used it as an opportunity. I went back and spent a week in Vancouver with my buddy Kevin, who was going to UBC at the time. And I got back to school and I was like, you know what? There's nothing I want to do here. You know, I've been living in Whistler now at that point for 5 years. And I was like, I just want to live in Whistler and find a way to make it work there. And so I started coaching the local freestyle club here, kind of became the main mogul coach and did that for a couple of years. And then, you know, our team had really good success in those 2 years. I got actually offered a job with the Canadian team to be one of the mogul coaches, kind of bringing the new guys up to speed.
Okay.
That were just getting on the team. And it was at that point I met JP Auclair, JF Cousin, and Vinny Dorian.
And that's when it all started? That's the beginning of the new school?
Yeah, I mean, to a certain degree, it was already kind of happening because Shane Zox and I had become really good friends in those previous couple of years. And, you know, Shane and I, as skiers, we just had the exact same attitude. Like, we were mogul skiers, but we were very much kind of free riders or free skiers in our minds. Once mogul skiing made its debut in the Olympics, it really started getting regimented and kind of robotic.
For sure.
A lot of what attracted me to it in the beginning was gone. And for guys like Shane and I, like, yeah, we would train moguls in the traditional way, and then we'd go out and hit jumps up at the top of the mountain, some big windlip or whatever, and we started doing tricks. We were kind of like poaching what was called the snowboard park because there was no terrain park. It was only snowboard parks back in the mid-90s. We'd poach those on our skis and get chased out of there by snowboarders and ski patrol and whatever. I guess thinking back now, it really started that year that JP, JF, and Vinny came onto the team, and I was the coach, and Shane was on the team as well. And basically, when training was done for the day, Shane and JP, JF, Vinny, and I would all take off and go either to the snowboard park or to just find some jump on the mountain and try and do silly tricks.
And this is what, 96?
Yeah, that would be 96 when it all started. 97 was the first ever shoot we'd done as a group. It was actually with Greg Stump for his movie called Fistful of Moguls. Mm-hmm. And we did this windlip session with Stumpy. And for me, like, I landed my first ever Misty flips that day. JP was throwing these big 720 combos and just big spins with grabs, and Shane, same thing. And that was really like the first time. And people, when we started doing this stuff for real, people started noticing pretty quick. And it was the same year that we met Johnny DeCesare as well. Shane actually met him at the SIA show in Vegas that year, and they hit it off. And then about a month after that shoot with Greg Stump, Johnny came up to Whistler, and we started working on his film called State of Mind, made with 2 VHS.
So crazy how that used to be done.
Yeah.
At this point, are you kind of looking at your gear and it's not really functional for the skiing that you want to start doing?
It actually started in a different way a little bit. It started less from the necessity of gear and more from the death of popular mogul skiing.
Okay.
Up to this point, because I was good mogul skiers on the Canadian team, all this kind of stuff, in Japan, mogul skiing was huge in the late 80s and through the 90s. And I was getting paid by my ski sponsor at the time, Nigel Dockstein, to ski. And so I'd go over and with a handful of other people, and we'd do demos in Japan. Mogul demos. I was making mogul videos at the time. It's a lot of how to ski moguls. And funny enough, I'd never really let anyone know this, but I was actually not only skiing in the videos, I was already directing them and editing them and everything.
So the precursor to Switchback Entertainment was how-to videos in Japan.
Exactly.
And did you have patches on your knees at all times in that era?
All times. Let's be clear. At all times.
Okay, just making sure.
Yeah. And so what happened was I'd been making about half my income through all these sponsors I had in Japan that were paying the bills, and I was doing demos for and videos and all this kind of stuff. And it was fall 96. They came to me and said, hey, business is so bad in Japan. This will have to be the last year of your contract. And I was like, oh, okay, which was super cool of them. They basically gave me almost a year's warning that my contract was going to expire, which was amazing because it gave me time to go, okay, well, what am I going to do now? Try and come up with a plan. At the same time as I hear this news and go, okay, well, I've got to figure out what I'm going to do and how I'm going to make a living. We start doing all these funky tricks on skis, and I had a dinner with a friend of mine who was one of my coaches on the Canadian team who is now coaching the Japanese mogul team, Steve Faring. And Steve's like, Japan, the ski industry is tanking, mogul skiing's dying, they're looking for something new. He was working with Solomon in Japan at the time, and he's like, what about this new stuff you guys are doing? Like, is there a ski that you guys could make that would make this better? And I'm like, yeah, totally. Like, we need a twin tip. We need something we can go backwards on. We need something that's like wider platform, that's got a carving profile. I mean, keep in mind, we're skiing on like 73 mil waisted, like swords.
Right.
Basically, mogul skis that have no side cut. Like, they're just designed for going straight through moguls, basically. And so Steve's like, well, why don't you guys put together some ideas and I'll try and shop them around for you in Japan. And so for the next 2 months after that meeting, we worked on putting together the original air carving video. And I wrote up like a 20-page proposal about why this was good business for a ski company and all this stuff. And in August 97, Steve started shopping it around to all the ski companies in Japan. I mean, he took it to Solomon first because that was sort of the connection he had.
Yep.
But we were like, well, let's not limit it to one brand. Like, let's shop it around and see what happens. And long story short, pretty much every brand slammed the door in his face. It was like, this is stupid. It's never going to work. You guys are wasting your time. You're wasting our time. There was only 2 brands in the end that saw a little bit of something in it. One was Solomon and the other was Rossignol, actually.
Huh.
And so fast forward of 2 or 3 months, Rossignol ended up going, well, we think there's something here. We believe in you guys. You're awesome skiers, but we don't want to develop a product with you. They had these little like 140 centimeter little twin tip skis. Can't even remember what the name was on them. And they said, here, we'll give you these and you can be a part of the Rossignol team. And we're like, no. I was like, you guys are missing the point. Like, this isn't the point. We're not looking for just a ski sponsor. We're trying to make something here. And then like Shane Zox got kind of cold feet at that point. He was like looking at going into the winter without any ski sponsor, and the idea of paying for skis was complete crap. So
Shane was part of that program too with you guys.
Yeah. Shane was part of the original. He kind of jumped ship when it looked like it wasn't going anywhere. So Shane's like, K2, they just launched this ski called the Poacher, and they've offered me a spot on their K2 free ride team, and I'm going to go for it. And I was like, yeah, I get it, And so it came down, then it was just me and the 3 French boys. And I was like literally had pretty much given up. Like I was at the very end of thinking that it could be possible because, skiing was starting, the mountains were opening. It was mid to late November.
Yep.
And then I got a call from a guy at Solomon in Canada, actually named Mingo. And he gave me like the best pep talk ever, like an hour on the phone. Like, I saw your idea. It's been getting talked about inside Solomon all over the world. And man, I think this is brilliant. I think you guys are going to totally change skiing. And you just got to believe. He's like, give us some time. Give us some time. There's some people in this company that don't believe in it, but we're working on them and we think it might happen. And I was like, okay. So it kind of like revived me again. And then I think it was only about 2 weeks after that when we got the call. And it was like, Solomon was like, yep, we're going to go for it. We're going to work with you guys. Let's make this ski. Let's make it happen. And we were like, whoa, this is awesome. Funny part next was they wanted the designs for the ski because I'd actually made like physical designs for the ski. And I was like, no, I'm not giving you the designs for the ski until we have a contract.
Smart.
And they're like, well, okay. And I'm like, yeah, get us a contract and then we'll fork over the design. So they thought they knew what we wanted. The first protos were like the biggest joke you've ever seen. They were these hyper carving skis with like 40 mil side cut or something stupid. They were like 130 centimeters long. They had no twin tips. We just looked at them and were like, this is the stupidest thing we've ever seen. Are you guys crazy? And so we realized that we had a lot of work to do. And so while I didn't give them the designs, we started telling them, no, it's got to be more like this. No, it's like this. No, it's like this, And then it was about 2 months later, we were in Colorado for a Moguls World Cup in Breckenridge. And the next day was the first U.S. Free Skiing Open in Vail.
Mm-hmm.
And I brought the boys over. Everyone competed on their mogul skis. JP won the big air, I think. Son won the slope style. And we literally, like right after the event finished, we raced back to our hotel to get changed in Breckenridge. And in the lobby of the hotel waiting was a package with my name on it. And we opened it up and it was the first ever yellow 1080. And we opened that box and we're like, holy crap, this is the coolest thing we've ever seen.
Yeah.
Looks like they got it right. So we literally were in our hotel for like 15 minutes to get changed, grabbed the ski, raced back over to Vail. Actually, we kept the ski in the box. We raced over to Vail. The awards were up at the top of the mountain. We had to take the gondola up, brought our box with us, kept the box kind of hidden in the corner of the room. And then when JP got announced to come up to win big air, he carried the ski up and held it above his head. And no one had ever seen it before. And it was just like this moment where everyone was like, oh my God, what is that?
Yeah.
So it was pretty cool.
That was the birth of free skiing, I heard, the birth of this round.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. I mean, if there was a point in time, everyone who would become sort of the leaders for the decade following, they were all there. And that was the first time we'd met guys like Kreitler and McConkey and Shane Anderson and these kind of guys. So it was like the first time that everyone kind of came together.
Could you feel the energy of like a new part of the sport evolving and you guys were the ground level of it?
Totally, yeah. There was so much buzz. It was all new to us too. So I mean, I'm sure that had a little bit to do with it, but it certainly felt like there was something bigger going on than just like some personal stoke and hype, you know what I mean?
And then in the next 3 years, the whole industry changes for the better. And I've seen some interviews with you before where you say that skiing was always cool and snowboarding didn't reignite skiing. But I feel like snowboarding just showed another element of what could be done on snow that ski technology hadn't caught up to yet. And you guys were the catch-up point where the technology was equal to what snowboarding had. And then you could do the tricks that they could do, but you could just do them bigger and with all the advantages of ski technology.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, there's no question that snowboarding was a catalyst to that movement. Skiing had, through rules and regulations over the decades, had sort of stifled itself down. And when snowboarding came in, there were a bunch of punk kids that didn't give a shit.
Right.
And that was the attitude that was kind of needed to sort of change everything and shake it up. We loved the attitude. We were just like, yeah, but let's do this on skis, And it was kind of like the rebirth of the 70s freestyle, where anything kind of went, which was pretty fun.
In the next 3 years, everybody who's at that contest that first year becomes a full-on rock star within the ski world with their different sponsors. Skiing realized that this was the way to market skiing and make it cool again, and they went in 100% behind this type of athlete. I would think the trips, the pay, and everything that comes along with being a rock star in the ski world, it just started happening.
Exactly, yeah.
And for you, what was the best of those times?
There was a few times in the next couple of years after that where it was kind of like, you can't believe that this is really happening. And one of those times was, we went to the X Games for the first time, and ESPN embedded a camera crew into our lives. Like, we were like doing reality TV basically before reality TV. We'd wake up and there'd be a camera crew sitting there filming us and filming Kusan just as a complete disaster in the corner,
Right.
hungover from the night before. And that was one. I remember we were doing a photo shoot that later that spring up in Whistler too, and we were on this quarter pipe, kind of natural quarter pipe at Whistler. The shots have been seen. Anyone who was around in that area has seen shots from it, but there was 5 different film crews there.
Wow.
Everyone from Johnny and Poor Boys, Matchstick, TGR, Warren Miller, and there was a TV crew. And it was just like every direction you looked, there were cameras. And it was like, whoa.
That's crazy, because if you go back 3 years, you could get cameras to come up to film skiing.
No, exactly. Yeah. Skiing was dead. I don't think the kids today realize, if you weren't around at that time and deeply involved in skiing, realize like how bleak it was to be a young skier and how you were just so uncool.
Yep.
So it felt like a big deal. And I remember like same thing going over to Japan after all this stuff started blowing up. Kusan was the rock star. Like, I remember having to sneak Kusan out of a ski lodge. We had to sneak him out through the kitchen because there were so many screaming girls waiting to get his autograph and touch him.
That is crazy.
Yeah, it was awesome. It was like, whoa, man, we're rock stars. This is crazy. Yeah, this is good times.
And as the industry evolves, it's taken the technology that you guys put together and they keep evolving it.
I guess the big innovative years in skiing started a couple years before this, probably like 93, 4, 5, somewhere in there, where the shape skis came into the mix. And we kind of like built on top of that, and then fat skis built on top of that, and then rocker skis built on top of that. So it was a really exciting decade and a half for ski technology. I mean, when you looked at what we were skiing on in the early 90s and you look what you ski on in the 2005 to 2010, you're like, whoa, completely different experience.
How involved are you with Solomon in developing skis these days?
Pretty involved. It kind of goes in waves. There's a handful of skis over the years that have certainly my fingerprints all over them. The first was the 1080. And then after that, the Pocket Rocket was something I had a lot to do with.
Mike, you've made them a lot of money. Just those 2 skis right there.
Yeah, I feel okay about still being a sponsored skier with Solomon. I feel like they've gotten good value out of me.
Yeah, you've earned your keep.
Yeah. I went on a big drought, though, after the Pocket Rocket. I had a little bit of involvement in the gun and foil, but not a lot in the design. And then the next big one where I was really in the trenches was the original Rocker 2. Okay. And I literally sketched out that whole tip and tail honeycomb stuff. Okay. I sketched that on a piece of paper. I'll never forget, I was in a pub in Whistler and we were talking about this new ski. And I was like, the biggest thing at the time for me was weight. Skis had gotten super fat. Yep. And they were getting heavy. And it's like, how can we pull weight out of it? And, Dav was working with Kesley and they had those little windows in the tip and tail. And I was like, we need something like that, but something different, obviously. And then I worked with the ski engineer named Aldrich and literally sketched out this honeycomb tip and tail. Because on a rockered ski, we were like, well, the only time a rockered ski tip and tail is making contact in the snow is when it's powder. Yep. Because if you're on hard pack, your effective edge is actually pretty short. And so we're like, well, you don't need the strength up in the tip and tail the way you do with a traditional ski. So let's pull that weight out of there. And it was one of those funny things. I mean, the Rocker 2 had reasonable success, but then Rosnyol came out and just did a way better job of showing that technology, copied our technology and did a way better job of showing it.
They put those lights on the tips in the windows at stores, man, and it just crushed it.
Exactly. I was so pissed because I had this shop guy tell me how Rosnyol just invented this mind-blowing technology. And this is like 2 years after we'd done it with Solomon. And I was just like, oh, man. It still blows me away even to think about it, actually.
So that was the first part of my Mike Douglas interview. That happened in 2016. I took about an hour of interview, condensed that down to about 28 minutes. So now you have the backstory of Mike Douglas and one of the more innovative skiers behind the scenes. And now we head up to Whistler, British Columbia to talk to Mike Douglas at his house, find out a little bit about the K2 Back 9 and everything that's happened since then in his career. Because, as I said, he was a big-time player behind the scenes, and now he's a big-time player behind the lens. But before we talk to Mike, I need to talk about my sponsors. And my first sponsor is Evo, and there is some exciting news going on the Evo front. They are coming to Canada. Yes, they will be in Whistler, Blackcomb. They're opening 5 retail locations. Exciting news for the brand, and it's going to be great for Whistler as well. When you shop online at Evo or in store, you can give them this code, capital TPM, the number 10, all one word, and you can use it at checkout or tell your cashier, and you will get that discount. My next sponsor is Rescue Water, and if you haven't tried a Rescue Water, pick one up next time you're at the grocery store. Drink it after a workout, when you get off the hill, or after your après session, and what you'll find is that Rescue Water will hydrate you better than anything else. It's proactive recovery. Think of it like this. If you're really tired, you skip the coffee and you grab an energy drink. Well, if you really need to hydrate, skip the sports drink and drink a cold Rescue Water. It replaces electrolytes much better than your traditional sports drink, and you will feel the difference. Make it work for you by heading over to rescuewater.com, and you'll save 20% on a 12-pack case with the code RESQWATERTPM. That's all one word. My next sponsor is the company that won Powder Magazine's Apparel of the Year this year. I'm talking about Outdoor Research. I've been using OR products since I moved to Seattle in 2000 because I know they develop and test their products in the Northwest, and I know that means I'll always be dry and warm. OR is committed to improving your experience with exceptional product so that you don't have to think about your gear when you're on your journey. When you're shopping for outerwear this winter, get the best. Head on over to outdoorresearch.com and you'll get 15% off your order with the checkout code POWEL15. Powell's all in caps, 15's the number. Those are my sponsors. Now let's head to Whistler. I'm sitting in the basement of the Godfather, or as Shane Zox, who I saw last night, renamed the Grandfather. And I thought that was funny because Mike Douglas has a storied pro career that you've heard about in the last part of the podcast that you listened to. But his storied pro career has transitioned into a film career, and we're going to start our interview here. You just got back from the POW Summit, which is Protect Our Winters, and what was said at the summit?
Climate change is an urgent issue of our time, and it's not debated anywhere in the world except for America. Obviously, with the midterm elections coming up and the importance of who's in political power, the POW Summit this year was a lot about how do we get the right people in Congress. As a Canadian, I'm a little bit of a mild outsider on that, but I recognize that what happens in the U.S. affects what happens all over the world, and it's a big deal.
Speaking of climate change, there's something that you probably post every year, but I happened to notice it this year, where you went up on the Horseman Glacier and you looked at the snow melt or how it was looking, the glacier melt. And how is it looking this year? Pretty good?
Yeah, not so good.
Okay.
Not so good. I mean, the Horseman Glacier, I remember skiing up there as a kid and thinking, like, this thing is so deep. This is hundreds of feet deep and a massive glacier stretching over this whole big bowl. And over my time up there and running ski camps over the years, I've just seen it deteriorate. And what's frightening is that it's not just deteriorating in an even pace, it's accelerating. And what I saw this year was what I expected, to be honest, but it was frightening. I mean, that glacier is on its last legs.
You think in your lifetime you're not going to see that glacier anymore based on how things are going right now?
Oh, it's not even close to my lifetime. If it keeps going the way it is right now, 10 years tops.
Wow. That's a first-hand account of what's going on. So you're at the Protect Our Winters Summit, and it sounds like there's some pretty heavy hitters there. You talked about having conversations with people that were like way more important than you and I will ever be.
Yeah, I mean, the cool thing about POW is, it started by Jeremy Jones, pro snowboarder.
Yeah, he's awesome on rails.
Wrong Jeremy Jones, pal. The big mountain Jeremy Jones, who's an absolute legend. I mean, that guy has done so much on a snowboard, and now, I think POW's 11 years deep, and what he's taken it from and what it's become. I mean, POW in the U.S. is now 11 full-time employees.
Wow.
They're marching on Washington, lobbying on behalf of climate change a few times a year. They're getting in congressmen's faces. And they've got some heavy hitters behind them, like guys like Conrad Anker and Chris Davenport and almost every snowboard Olympic gold medalist from the last bunch of years, Gretchen Bleiler. And
Kelly Clark, and so it's a great crew of people. And then this year we've seen some really interesting business people get involved too. Some of the leading tech developers from Google. The guy that founded Strava was there this year.
Is he super competitive?
He's not, actually. He was a really cool dude. I had a great conversation with him. And then we've got, scholars from Harvard there and people that, are really tuned in to the science of this whole thing. It's frightening, but at the same time, it's inspiring. You get a group of people like that together and people that believe that there are things we can do. There are solutions to maybe not stop climate change, but at least slow it down and give ourselves a chance.
I interviewed Jeremy Jones, I think it was like the day after the election or a couple days after the election, and pretty much said to him, well, it looks like everything you've done in the past decade has been undone, and that's a bummer. And there's kind of a lot of truth to that. And at this point, what is the mindset of POW? It's all on the political end now, like you're saying, of like just trying to get people out so we can get the right people in to make the right decisions?
Well, the election in 2016 did a couple things. First of all, obviously changing the government in the US was a big negative if you care about climate because they've rolled back a ton of rules and regulations. But on the positive side, they've awoken the people. The people realize that, hey, we can't count on the government to take care of this stuff anymore. We kind of have to rally ourselves, and brands are getting behind it. Brands are taking some pretty serious political stances these days, and they're like, what do we stand for? What do we care about? And that's been fairly inspiring to see. But when it comes to moving forward on this stuff, according to the scholars, the people that study climate change and what can we do about it, they're like, honestly, it's great to recycle. It's great to compost, to drive an electric vehicle, to do all these things. We all should be trying to do our part. But what really makes change is government policy. You have to change where the bulk of the energy comes from. You got to get it out of coal and you got to get it into clean energy solutions like wind and solar. We have the technology, but it has to come from the government level. Otherwise, we're not going to make it. We're not going to pull off what we're trying to do.
We're not going to talk all about environment anymore, but we're going to recycle some old conversation. I did that. I was able to throw the word recycle in there. You didn't smile or anything, but that's okay. The K2 Back 9, I'm going to look at that as the last big highlight of your pro ski career. Although you are still a pro skier, you still get paid, right, to ski?
Believe it or not, I am on the cusp of turning 49 years old. Probably by the time this comes out, for all I know, I could be 49. And I'm still a pro skier. I still get paid to do this, which I'm so far past the point of where I thought that was possible that I don't even know what to think anymore, to be honest.
Every end of contract for you, are you sitting thinking about that? Like, they're not going to sign me again. I'm 49 years old. Why would they sign me?
You know what? I always go into the contract negotiations. I go prepared and I kind of justify my place, because one thing that's always sort of bothered me when you're a pro skier, air quotes, pro skier, is people that feel entitled. Like, that brand owes me, man. Like, I'm so rad. They just have to treat me well and give me respect and give me a pro model, give me this. I've seen that so much over the years. The fact is, the brands don't owe you anything. Our job is to sell ski equipment. I mean, seriously, that's what a pro skier does. That's why we get paid. If we're not moving product, if we're not inspiring people to get out and use what we're using, then we're failing at our job. And so I kind of come at the whole thing from that perspective and take an honest look at myself and try to go, well, am I helping out Salomon as, in my case, my biggest sponsor? Am I helping them sell gear? Am I helping get people inspired to get out there and use the stuff that I use? And luckily, most of the time I can be like, yeah, I think I'm doing okay.
I would say you are. I would also say with you that while there are a lot of entitled people, you would be one of the few that could have a little more entitlement just based on the 1080, the Pocket Rocket, the Rocker 2, I think, all your skis. I wouldn't say your skis, but you were a huge developmental help for those products. I mean, they don't pay you to be an engineer by any means. They pay you to be the pro skier, but you helped produce products for them that generated millions. So they should have a little bit of loyalty.
Yeah, and you know what? Bruno Bertrand at Salomon has been the marketing guy at Salomon forever, and we have a super tight relationship and a ton of respect that flows back and forth. And I think that having people like that to work with is crucial, because you don't have to go out and resell yourself all the time. Like, we don't even, in our contract negotiations these days, I don't even have to bring up, I did this, I did that, whatever. It's just sort of like, it's more like, hey, is my voice still being listened to? And I usually come up with a few examples why I think it is. And he kind of goes, yeah, I think you're right.
You've seen all your peers get dropped by sponsors over the years. There's not one person that started with you that is still going that you're probably friendly with, I would think, on the pro level. Maybe one or two, but I can't really think of any.
Chris Davenport.
But his is different. He owns his company, right?
Well, yeah, no. I mean, he has a ton of partners. I was just hanging with Dav at this POW Summit, but I overheard him tell somebody else he is the longest running North American Red Bull athlete, which is saying something.
Yeah, that is saying something. I wonder how many Red Bulls he drinks.
He does drink Red Bull, actually. I often wonder when I see those Red Bull guys, because I don't drink a lot of Red Bull. I actually catch Dav drinking some Red Bulls. Okay,
but who was the last one that lost their sponsorship and you were just kind of like, oh man, there's another dude down. It's just me and Dav.
Watching Seth Morrison drop away from his sponsors, that was a bummer. Mm-hmm. I mean, Seth is a legend. I would say there's only a handful of skiers that I can think of in our business that it's like, that guy should just get the lifetime hookup. He's such a legend. And to see Seth all of a sudden like asking online one day, anyone know what kind of skis I should ski on this year, was just like, it was like a gut punch, man. I was bummed when I heard that. I sent him a message right away and I was like, dude.
Yeah, I sent him a couple pro forms, but I don't think he was appreciative of that. That's not even funny, huh?
That was a bummer, Nobody's perfect. We all have our ups and downs, but Seth's a legend.
Skiing doesn't really take care of its legends that well. I mean, you're the only legend that, Plake's with Elon, but Plake should be on K2, Seth should be on K2, Schmidt should be on K2, and those guys in some other sports probably would be legacy guys. What's different about skiing, and why doesn't that happen?
I hear you say that all the time on your podcast when I listen, and you're right. I mean, I don't feel that skiing does a good job of taking care of its legends, and the only thing that I can think that makes skiing different from, say, surfing or snowboarding or any of the other action sports is that skiing is so broad. I mean, when we say skiing, we often are thinking of like free skiing, right?
Yeah.
So big mountain skiers, park pipe skiers, sort of the more aggressive guys on the backside of the mountain. But if you look at skiing in the big picture, to the average Joe, a lot of people think of ski racing. I mean, the most influential skier in the world right now, I think, is Lindsey Vonn. Ski racer, she doesn't do what we do. So I think skiing kind of gets splintered off into these factions and categories that make it tough for this skier is the legend. I think most free skiers would say Candide is really the legend, right? But if you ask the average skier at Breckenridge on a Saturday who the legendary skier is, you'd probably get 10 different answers, but half of them might be Bodie Miller.
Yep.
Maybe that's why.
Could be, but I guess the last big moment of your pro ski competitive career, there was an event called the Back Nine. I do bring this up every once in a while in the podcast, but an event where, 10, 12 of the best skiers in the world were invited, and you were the oldest by 10 years at that point, I would think at least. And if I were in your shoes at that point, I wouldn't expect an invitation. It would be like, oh, that's cool. I got invited. And I think that's probably when you were invited, it was like, well, we have to have the Godfather there. But there was no thought of who was going to win the contest beforehand because no one really thought about who was going to win. If we were to put a top 3 or a top 8, you wouldn't be there. It was like nice to have a legend there. Was that one of the more important contests of your career?
The cool thing about the Back Nine is it was a backcountry freestyle competition, and it wasn't just like a one-off, one day or one event or one jump kind of thing. It was like Back Nine is like playing a round of golf. Like you had to be consistent, and that was the key. And having it in the backyard here in Whistler was nice because I know the terrain, I know the way the snow works, and up until that point in my career, that's kind of what I was doing. I was trying to do tricks in natural terrain and take what was being done in terrain parks and move it to the backcountry, which was still kind of new at that time.
Yeah.
Like it wasn't like common like it is nowadays. You're right, though. I was just stoked to be invited. I mean, the legends in the field, Eric Jorlefson and Sammy Carlson and all these guys that were like the hot shit at the time were in this thing. And it was just cool to be part of. And the funny thing, I was hosting a TV show back in those days. I was up at Micah heli skiing. We'd come off 3 of the best days of skiing I've ever had in my life. We had literally a meter of fresh snow, the most dry blower snow, stable conditions, and I skied my brains out up there for 3 days for this TV show. Left there at 5 p.m. the night before the back 9 started. The camera crew was like, dude, we really just want to stay here. You're the one that has to get back to Whistler. We're going to sleep in the car. You can drive. We'll go with you, but you have to drive. So I drove, arrived back in Whistler at 2 a.m., repacked my bag, went to sleep at 3. The call time that morning was 6. I got 3 hours of sleep on the first night before the back 9. But I'd just come off some of the best skiing in my life. I was fired up, and things just started falling into place.
The cool thing about that, it was all rider judged, and at the end of the day, there was no argument. It was like Mike Douglas is the winner. And I look at that as your great send-off in your pro career, because about this time, and you're still pro, and it's just, you know, you're not putting out segments unless they're thought-out stories these days. But this is about the time that you start Switchback Entertainment, too.
Yeah, exactly. I was 36 when I won the back 9. And for me, it was like, it just was the perfect ending that I always kind of wanted. It was like, win your last contest you ever do. And I was like, that's it. I'm done. I always wanted to go out with a win. Like, it doesn't get better than this. Not only that, but it's the biggest prize purse I ever won. I think I won $25,000 in that event. It was the biggest payout I've ever had in my career. And I was like, 36 years old. And I feel super good about saying that. Yeah, and it was at that time because when I was at that age, the upper limit of what you were supposed to be as a pro skier was 35. Mm-hmm. It's like nobody's a pro skier past 35. Like, don't even think about it. And so I was kind of looking around and go, well, you know, it's probably a good idea to diversify. Well, what do I like doing? So at that point, I've always kind of dabbled behind the scenes with a lot of the ski movies that I worked on. So I'll go in the edit bay, and I'll work on my own segment, or I'll help them with an intro or whatever. And actually,
you used to make bump movies too, right?
I did, yeah. In the 90s, I was making these bump movies for Japan with like the Olympic champions and stuff like that. And that's where I kind of learned how to edit. Like back then, linear editing, which is totally bizarre for people that if you got thrown back there, you wouldn't believe that you would ever do it that way.
Right.
Working from tape to tape and stuff like that. But yeah, I've always kind of liked that behind the scenes stuff. And so I had an opportunity actually from Japan to make a film for Solomon Japan, just like a 15-20 minute thing. And I decided to start a film production company called Switchback Entertainment. And in the beginning, it was just me. And I would call in a buddy from Vancouver who was kind of worked in the film industry to come up and help me once a week. So I would literally be editing and working on all the post-production stuff. And when I hit roadblocks, I had this sheet of paper and I would just write down on the sheet, what I couldn't figure out how to do. Like, I want to do this, but I don't know how to do it. And literally he would just come up once a week and spend a few hours with me and answer all those questions I had. And that's kind of how I learned how to do all this stuff.
When you're full on filming parts and doing all your different stuff as an athlete, are you asking questions to the videographers back then? Do you care about that stuff and are trying to soak up the knowledge?
I wouldn't say I was asking questions. I'd say I was working with them. I think one of the things that's allowed me to sort of get behind the camera and make it work is that I could always see a set of lines on a mountain face in 3 dimensions. So I could imagine where the best camera angle was. And I'd often help the camera guys get into position with the light. The light's here. The angle's going to be good here. It's got a good backdrop, whatever. And there's certain skiers that do that. And it's interesting because if you look back through the ski magazines and see the skiers that probably hit cover shots more than anyone else, they were the guys that were able to put their eyes into the photographer's eyes and figure out where the spot on the ridge to make the turn is. And like a guy like Dan Treadway, for example, had a ton of magazine covers because he could do that. He knew where to make the turn, where it was going to be perfect for the photographer or cameraman.
So he was thinking about somebody else while he was skiing and got the results that they wanted, which helped him.
Totally.
Now it's time to jump into my final set of sponsors, and Spy Optic has been taking a playful approach to everything they create since 1994. And this year, they're killing it on the innovation game. Spy's Ace EC goggle is the future of how we'll see the mountain. It features electrochromic one-lens technology. What does that mean to you? Well, this is a goggle that packs the power of 3 lenses into one by changing tints with the touch of a button. These are goggles of the future, and they create one lens for any light. It's the most functional goggle on the mountain, and nothing compares. To find out more about the Ace EC, head on over to spyoptic.com. You'll get all the details on the goggle, and for listening to the POW movement, they're going to give you 20% off whatever you purchase on their site. To do that, when you check out, you need to enter the code capital TPM, the number 20, and you will get that discount. My final sponsor is the 10 Barrel Brewery out of Bend, Oregon. And they are all about drinking beer outside and supporting snow sports and culture. And you can see the support everywhere. They're the only beer brand to create their own snow sports movie. They've also supported Carl Phosphate and Lucas Wax's new project. Everywhere you look in action sports, 10 Barrel is supporting it, and there's not many companies that are doing what they are doing. They put their money where their heart is, and when you're at the store buying beer, make sure you pick up the beer that supports you, the 10 Barrel Brewery out of Bend, Oregon. To find out more about Pray for Snow, the movie, the beers and pubs in Portland, Bend, San Diego, and Denver, head on over to 10barrel.com. Those are my sponsors. Now we'll get back into it.
You really don't have the background at all. You don't know that much about it, but you start a film production company because you can, and it's not anything too serious the first few years, I don't think, is it?
No, I mean, it was like putting a hand in a bucket over here to just like, okay, so when this whole pro skier thing implodes on me, which I figured could happen any year at that point, at least I've got something to kind of fall back on. Keep in mind, by this point, I've got one child. Shortly into it, I had another on the way. So I got a family, I've got a mortgage, I've got all these real life things that, you know, going out and throwing yourself off cliffs for sponsors for money, maybe not the best thing in terms of like long-term income stability.
Yeah. You got to have plan B.
For sure. So it was my plan B to start with. And then I think it was like after 3 years, I was in a meeting in France with Solomon, and we were talking about kind of the future of media and where's it all going. And I remember the meeting started, they were talking about making a Solomon team movie. It was kind of like, you know, Matchstick was huge at the time. Poor Boys, TGR, Level 1 were like the big ski movie companies. Yeah. But they were like, you know, we want something that identifies a little tighter with the brand rather than just having a handful of random skiers in a random ski movie and a logo on the screen. Let's do something that's really ours. And right at that time, I remember saying in the meeting, you guys ever watch that thing called YouTube? This is probably the first year YouTube came out.
Like 2006, 2007.
Exactly, yeah. And a couple people in the room were like, yeah, like I find myself going there and watching some funny stuff or whatever. And I'm like, what if we made like a ski channel there? Instead of just making a movie that comes out every year, why don't we make like a ski variety show or something? And they're like, yeah, it's kind of a cool idea. And so it kind of grew from there. And we turned it around pretty quick. I think we launched the first season of Solomon Free Ski TV like 6 months later. And in the beginning, it's kind of funny to go back and watch now, because in the beginning, and this was sort of like the hat that I was wearing, I used to host this show called Pontiac World of Skiing, which was like a half-hour ski variety show. And that's how I kind of pictured like was a small version of that. Like, oh, we're going to go and profile this athlete one week, and then the next week we're going to go ski this resort, and then the next week we're going to look into this project this person's doing. And that's kind of how it started. And then over time it's just evolved into more films and documentaries and a variety of other stuff. So
in those early years, I think you were getting a lot of footage from the MSPs in those worlds and repurposing them. And then eventually you decide, and this is probably with Free Ski TV, hey, we can create our own productions. We don't need to grab footage from somebody else and redo it. We can take our own shit and create our own stories. I mean, is that the plan from the beginning, or does that evolve into that?
So what happened in the beginning was MSPs reaching out like, hey, can we get a raise this year? Can we get more money? And Solomon's like, yeah, no, because we're going to kind of do our own thing. And they started freaking out, obviously, because they're like, what do you mean you're going to do your own thing? Like, are you a competitor now? And in the beginning, it was like, no, we're not going to be your competitor. We're not going to make ski movies. We're not going to do a tour. We're not going to step into your world. What we want to do is work with you, though, and tell stories that maybe complement your stories. Maybe we can team up on some projects. Maybe we can find ways to work together. Keep in mind, ski movies at this time, too, were pure ski porn. You would film the whole season, and you'd end up with 20 shots in the movie that were the sickest, most badass lines from Alaska or the biggest jumps you did. Everything else hit the floor. And for me at that time, I thought there was just huge opportunity that was being lost, which was what happens on the down days? What happens when the guy's not flashing the line? What's he doing at the top of the line? And I thought, I think a lot of that stuff's almost more interesting than the ski porn. Because at that point, I've been doing ski movies for so long that I'd go to a premiere and I'd start zoning out halfway through. I'm watching the film for the first time and I'm like, this isn't good. And if I'm zoning out, I love this stuff. If I'm zoning out, tons of people are probably zoning out.
Yeah.
So in the beginning, we started doing some team up sort of partnership stuff with like, let's combine resources. We'll go on this trip. You guys put out the ski porn segment and we'll take it and tell a little bit more of a story around the trip with a little bit more personality and that kind of stuff. And that's kind of where it started. And it was like us throwing out a bit of an olive branch to be like, hey, we're not trying to take you guys down. We just want to do it a little different way.
Solomon, was it a hard sell at all, or they totally bought in? Because these things take a lot of money to happen. It's not like it's just like, oh, we'll put 10 grand over here and we'll get a free ski TV episode. They cost a lot. So did they buy into it pretty easily?
Yeah, I mean, it happened quick and it happened fast. I mean, and I think, props to Solomon, looking back at all the years I've been with him, which is 21 years now. When there's a good idea goes out there, they move on it. 1080 got turned around in like 9 months, which was unthinkable at that time in the ski industry. I think when they really believe in an idea, when they get behind it, they go all in. The funny thing is, like, after we had the first couple of seasons and we had success and we were getting like bigger viewer numbers than virtually anybody in that online, brand new sort of online world, I felt like every company started making some kind of little web series or something like that. But where they failed was, like you just said, they weren't investing in it. From the beginning, like Solomon realized, if we're going to get something out of this, we need to put something in. And we're working with significant budgets. Like I've got a 4-minute piece coming out this year as part of Solomon TV that costs like 150 grand to produce.
Wow.
But that's what you have to do to make it good.
Back then, in the early days, there were shorter productions than you're doing today. 5 minutes, 6 minutes long. You didn't know anything about what you know today. You probably didn't know color correcting or a lot of the other things that you had to pay for. So what does something like that cost for them back then?
I want to say the first episodes we were probably putting together for like 5 to 10 grand each. It wasn't chump change, but it wasn't like Hollywood production value kind of stuff.
And now today you're able to do stuff that's still might not be Hollywood production value, but pretty close.
Yeah, I mean, when I look at like the best stuff we make, like not everything we do, but like our best stuff, I think will measure up to like the top commercial projects, like we're shooting with Phantom cameras and Red cameras and fancy drones and Cineflexes and all this kind of stuff. And when the idea is right, we're trying to throw as much behind it as we can.
And I think when the company, I won't say it really grows, but I think the stories even tighten up more and you get a lot better. Maybe it's like between 2010 and 2012, I think you start working with Dave Mossop. I think you bring in Jeff Thomas. Does that take a lot of work off your plate? Because I'm thinking that you're like the only dude doing everything. You might have an intern. I think Steve Horton was an intern at one point. But other than that, it's all you, and then you bring some other dudes in. Does that make life easier for you?
I mean, in certain ways, it made life easier. But what it actually did was just make what we were doing way better. When Jeff Thomas came in, we started taking it seriously. And around that same time, Dave Mossop was just getting his start with the Sherpas, and him and I spent a season working pretty closely together on a bunch of projects. We brought in Blair Richmond, who's a visual effects specialist out of Vancouver, and he brought a whole, like, sort of the Hollywood dimension into our stuff, like the professionalism, I would say, that comes from the bigger film industry. And then Anthony Bonello came in, and he brought really solid storytelling skills. And the funny thing is, you never really get less busy. You just do cooler shit. That's what it comes down to. And ultimately, that's more fun. When you can put something out that you're really proud of, it feels good,
Do you have your hands in everything that you're doing? Because in your world, there's behind the camera, there's editing, there's putting together the deals, a lot of different things. Being that this is your company, do you have your fingerprints on every aspect of it? Or do you let people run with different versions of it? How do you operate your business?
The Switchback team is really, we're a bunch of jacks of all trades. And we all kind of are dipping in on everything and helping each other out in various ways. I kind of oversee the greater like business umbrella. negotiating the deals and making sure that it works from a dollars and cents standpoint. And then after that, like it really depends on the project. Like there's projects where I'll be the director, but I'm also one of the skiers.
Do people give you shit for that or think about that at all? Of like, oh, he's putting himself in his own production?
For the most part, not really. I mean, in the ski world, it's not that big a deal. I think it has been slightly awkward in like the greater documentary film world. So we've tried to expand outside of skiing a handful of times over the years into trying to make projects that maybe hit a different audience. And that's where it gets a little bit awkward with sort of the size of who we are. And it is uncomfortable sometimes to be the subject of a film you're directing. But that's when I lean on the guys around me. Like, you know, for our documentary feature film we did, Snowman, in the beginning, I wasn't even supposed to be in that film. And in the end, it ended up being almost as much about my life as the main subject's life. And that's where Anthony came in as crucial, because he sort of had this extra set of eyes over here and was able to guide that story. Whereas when you're too deep in it, sometimes you get lost inside that.
Oh, for sure. And in the editing process too, I mean, I can see that maybe, hey, I want to be perceived more this way or that way. And you have to have someone come in and be like, the story's told best like this. And sometimes it might not be the way you want it told, but that's because you're behind the lens and in front of it. So this is a weird thing to be a part of.
Totally. I mean, there's a lot of humble pie to be eaten as a filmmaker. I can tell you that. Like, we call it killing your darlings. And, you know, like, you might have a vision for a scene right from the start, and then you get into the edit suite, or you think it's great, and then you take it to a test audience, which we do for pretty much all our bigger projects. We'll actually rent like a little theater, and we'll fill it full of 20 or 30 friends or people that we trust that have good opinions, and we'll sit them down. And sometimes they're like, it kind of sucks.
Okay.
and you got to eat that. And like, sometimes they're like, yeah, you know that scene? And you're like, yeah, you're like the one that I really thought was awesome. Yeah, that's got to go. But you got to do that. I mean, that's how it goes.
And with Solomon Free Ski TV, by the time you get to like season 5, you're winning awards. You've got like at least 500,000, I don't know if subscribers or viewers, but it's growing really big. And eventually you decide to get into making longer features. What made you want to make a longer feature?
Well, the funny thing is, to me, the whole Solomon Free Ski TV thing and all our productions for that matter revolved around commercials and the web.
Yep.
And I never really thought beyond that. I didn't have big aspirations to be a movie director or a high-end filmmaker. But what happened was I got contacted by the director of the Mountain Film Festival in Telluride, Colorado. And they said, hey, we've been watching your show. It's pretty cool. And have you ever thought of submitting your stuff to a film festival? And I was like, no, but how does that work?
Yeah.
And so they're like, well, hey, you know, we really like this one and this one. Could you send these to our festival? And then why don't you come down and you can present them? That was like, I think in 2010, I went down to Telluride to Mountain Film and my mind was just blown. It opened this whole new world of like some of the best outdoor adventure sport films I'd ever seen, inspiring people. And all of a sudden I was like, oh man, I want to do something like that, you know? And then that's kind of where that spark started. And then I got super lucky because the first project that I tried to take and make something more out of than sort of a webisode was featuring one of my buddies, Josh Dewick, who is just this legendary sit skier, Paralympian. And I've known Josh since before his accident when he was an able-bodied, ripping, aspiring mogul skier. And he went off a big jump back in 2004, I think, and overshot the landing, landed on his head and broke his back, dislocated his back, severed his spinal cord, and became a paraplegic. And, you know, kind of knowing him through that recovery process and whatever, we became friends, and I was cheering him on his way to the 2010 Olympics where he won a silver medal. But as I hung out with Josh, he was like, you know what? This Paralympic stuff's kind of cool, but I want to be a free skier. And I was like, okay, there's a story in here.
Yep.
Long story short, we sort of took Josh out up to Chatter Creek, took him cat skiing, and told his story. Instead of ending, you know, with his Paralympic medal, we went beyond that and took him free skiing. And what he was able to do was mind-blowing. So we made a film called The Freedom Chair. and sent it out to a whole bunch of film festivals. And I was still really new to the scene at that time, but it just started like winning awards, like winning the film festival awards everywhere. I think it won 15 awards in the end, which I was like, sweet, this is easy.
Do you get cocky at all? Or you like, is it easy?
I don't think I got cocky, but I was like, well, this stuff's not that hard. And so I was like, okay, well, I'm going to make another film. And then the next big one I kind of dove into was Andreas Franssen's story, who was this like philosopher, extreme skier guy that was like searching for a higher level of consciousness on the far side of fear. The way he talked and the things he did just were mesmerizing and kind of blew my mind. So I made a film about him, and it did really well too. And once again, I was like, okay, well, Sundance, here we come. Like, we're going for it. So I started making a film about my buddy Kevin, who's this avalanche controller who got in this crazy helicopter crash while dropping a bomb out of a heli. Heli crashes. They get out of the heli, they survive the crash, and as they're running across the slope, the bomb goes off, an avalanche comes down on them, and they survive.
And this is your best friend from childhood,
This is my best friend from childhood. Still my best friend this day. He lives like right up the street, literally right over here. And so we started making a feature on him with, you know, higher aspirations of hoping to get into like some mainstream film festivals. And then the humble pie came, because while the film in the end turned out okay, we didn't get into those big film festivals. And I think we won 2 awards in the end for it, but it wasn't what I expected. It wasn't like this big hit that I thought. And it was like, oh, okay, maybe this is kind of hard. And I realized that in looking back now, the first 2 characters I ever worked with, Josh and Andreas, were like 2 of the most interesting characters in skiing.
Mm-hmm.
And I went, okay. So it probably had a lot more to do with how interesting those guys were than my ability to concoct a story out of thin air.
Kevin's not bubbling with personality.
Kevin's a regular dude.
Yeah. He's your best friend, and you're like a regular dude.
Yeah. And these 2 other guys are exceptional personalities. And it took going through that process for me to sort of realize that not everyone is deserving of being a mainstream movie character. And maybe my skills as a filmmaker aren't quite as good as I thought. And not that I thought I was that great at that time, but because things were flowing without that much difficulty, I thought, oh yeah, okay, we'll just do this and then we'll do that. And I have so much respect for filmmakers that can constantly churn out high level stuff, because it is super difficult. And at the same time, it's like one of the things that I like about making films is that I don't feel particularly good at it, but I want to get better. And I feel like there's always something to learn. And I love that sort of advanced intermediate stage where you're trying to become an expert, but it's really hard. And that's kind of where I feel like I'm at in terms of film these days.
Talking about that film, The Snowman, I think one really unique thing and tragic thing as well is, I think the day that Kevin's accident happened was that the same day that McConkey passed? So 2 of your best friends, I don't know how great of friends you were with McConkey, but I'd say you guys have spent a lot of time together, and you almost lose like your 2 closest friends in one day, which has got to be like a heavy thing.
Yeah.
And the beginning of the loss for you, because while people have died throughout your life in skiing, it seemed like on that day it started where a lot more people were going to die afterwards than people that you worked with.
Yeah, you're 100% right. I mean, McConkey, I would never go as far as to say we were best friends. You know, Scott Gaffney was Shane's best friend, for sure. But we were good friends. And what Shane and I had in common was we were at the exact same stages in our careers. We were 6 weeks apart in age. Before Shane died, we were the 2 oldest guys doing what we were doing in the sport. We were starting young families at the same time. His family would come up here and visit us in Whistler because they got relatives around here. Shane and I would do at least one trip together every year. And he was the first close friend I've lost. That was a heavy blow. And to find out that Kevin was in this heli crash on the same day was just like my world felt like it was just imploding. Like everything that I thought would always be okay all of a sudden wasn't. And I mean, I don't know what would have happened if Kevin would have died that day too. I mean, he should have died, but I'm really thankful that he didn't.
Yeah. I don't even know if this is the next bout of death that you have to deal with. It's another one though. You have JP and Andres.
And Sarah Burke in 2012, like Sarah was like my little sister. In terms of like the pro skier girls out there, like I was never closer to anyone than Sarah. I never have been. Sarah, she's been coming to the ski camp I was running, Momentum camps, since she was like 12 years old.
You knew her from when she was a kid?
From when she was a kid, I got her first sponsor. Took her on her first ski trip as a pro. Traveled around the world with her. Like anytime she needed advice about what to do with this sponsor, should I go for this event? Should I challenge this organization to get women involved? Like she would call me. And I was always happy to give her advice. And to lose Sarah, and to lose her in a half pipe, I mean, that like, it's one thing with Shane, he was out pushing it, ski base jumping, but to lose Sarah training in half pipe, that one hit really, really hard. And then obviously, you know, moving forward, JP and Andreas. I mean, Andreas was so far out on the edge. And when I worked on the film with him, I was kind of like mentally bracing myself for that something could happen to him because of what he did. Like it was just the facts of what he was doing. He was pushing so far beyond what humans were doing on skis that possibility always lingered in the background. But with JP, I really didn't see that one coming. And that one hit hard. I mean, JP had a 4-month-old kid at the time. And me with 2 kids, it's just almost unthinkable, you know?
How do you cope with that? I ask this a lot because a lot of people seem to know all these people that have died, but how do you deal with it?
Somehow in your own mind, or at least in my mind, I look at myself and I go, okay, like how much risk am I taking? And there's certain risks, like when my wife, Susie, and I, when we had our first kid, you know, we had a talk about risk, about what I was doing. Because keep in mind, like back in those days, Shane was always trying to get me to base jump. And she would tell Shane, every time she'd see him, she's like, he's not base jumping. Like, don't even try, buddy. Because there's no way I'm going to let him base jump. And I respected that from her because I was like, you know what? There's certain risks that I don't want to take. And especially once we had a kid. But it's a fine line between, you know, what is risk, what is reckless risk, I'll say, and at what point do you stop living your life? And I think everybody probably draws that line in a different place. I try not to put myself in unnecessarily risky situations anymore, but inevitably, sometimes I find myself in a spot where I don't want to be. But more often than not, I'm like, I try to be really calculated about what we do. And to be honest, that's part of the reason that I got behind the camera, is that there's times when I want to be out there, like, you know, put me in 2 feet of blower in Japan in a bunch of beech trees and I'm the happiest guy you've ever seen. I'll jump off anything and have a blast. But take me to one of those peaks in Alaska where the cornices are peeling off the top and it's half ice and half rock, and I kind of don't like that anymore.
That's the young man's game. You're not a young man. We've established that. So yeah, I can totally see that. I would say at this point, I'm going to jump into our inappropriate questions for this round. They're going to be a lot tamer than before. I think we made you uncomfortable before, and that's fine. But these are going to be related to your career, and you're 49 years old. I'm asking your questions here. When was the last D-spin that you did? Because you used to try to do one every year, but you've gotten older, man.
It depends. So I'll qualify that 2 ways. The last proper one I did on snow was at the JP Memorial last year. Stomped it. Felt good about it. And then it's been a little while since I've done one on snow, but I did one into an airbag on the glacier in July of this year. So the muscle memory is still there. My goal is to get one at 50.
Okay. So we will see one by 50. You'll put it out on your social media. But we'll jump into question number 2. Your kids in skiing. It's interesting because your kid's like a high school skier now, right? Or a high schooler.
Except that he quit skiing.
Yeah. So he quit skiing, and you are a pro skier who's given your whole life to skiing. What is that conversation like with your kid when it's your passion and you want to have as many experiences on snow with your kid as possible because it means so much to you, but it's probably like your dad pushing whatever he was into onto you that you didn't want to do. And how is that now being a dad?
Well, that's why you have 2 kids. Because my youngest is still into skiing. Thank goodness. My little girl Kira, she's 11. She still loves to ski. But no, my son Devin, he skied quite a bit up until the time he was 13. And then he came to me that summer and he's like, Dad, I don't want to ski anymore. Or like, I'll ski a little, but I don't want to get out there and be on the freestyle team anymore and do that stuff. I want to play hockey. And I was like, well, you know what? I don't really care what you do as long as you're doing something.
Yeah.
The one thing that's not acceptable is sitting around the house all day playing video games and doing nothing.
Fortnite's supposed to be really cool, though.
Oh, don't get me started on Fortnite, man. So he started playing hockey last year. He played 1 year when he was like 6 years old. And then he started playing again last year and he got super into it. And it was actually pretty fun. I mean, I ended up taking, the team to the games and stuff like that. We'd always have a car full and drive last year. And I actually enjoyed the hockey scene a lot more than I actually thought I would.
Okay. And my final inappropriate question is about the gnarliness or lack thereof of everything you're doing these days. When you were younger, it was all about going the biggest and doing gnarly shit. And now, not only does it seem like it's not about doing that for you personally, but it looks like in your films, you're calculatedly making sure that it's more adventure and story-based than putting anybody's life on the line.
Part of that is that the sport's evolved. The sport, I think, like what people really latch on to is not always the gnar factor. I mean, there's certain things that will never go away, like Cody's line through the crack in Alaska. Like that was sick. I mean,
he didn't do it first.
True, he didn't. But you're right. No, he didn't. Travis did it first, but Cody really did it.
Yeah.
And that'll never go away. But at the same time, the sport's kind of evolved more into this sort of idea of adventure and just being outside and exploring and just having fun. And probably the luckiest thing in my career is that if you look at what's kind of been trendy in skiing, you can almost follow like the perfect arc of my career through it. When in the freestyle days, I was young enough to do all that stuff. I did it.
Yeah.
Then I went to Big Mountain. I was at the age where I had enough experience to do that. And then it started going into more backcountry and touring. And once again, I had the experience and interest to actually spend all day walking up the hill for one run down. And it kind of continues that whole idea of adventure, which is a lot safer and a lot nicer. But when it comes to taking risk, like, yeah, I'm not going to take the same physical risk, but you want risk, at least mentally, try talking about climate change on your social media and see what happens.
Yeah, that is pretty funny. Do you get a lot of direct messages of people just hating on you?
Oh, dude, it's crazy. Like, it's funny because, like I said, I just came from the POW Summit. And there I am with, like, the most badass group of mountain athletes that gets assembled of anywhere I go in a year anyway.
Only use 6 million gallons of jet fuel to get there.
Yeah, exactly. And what's the talk is about how scared everyone is about talking about climate online because the trolls and the haters just jump on you. And say that. Exactly.
It's so easy.
How did you get there? Did you walk? Did you take your cart and buggy?
Caroline Gleick gets destroyed.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, she's...
Like, I think it probably affects her emotionally.
Yeah, definitely. Well, she's had some real haters, like restraining order level haters. But, that's life.
Well, that's life. That's our podcast, Mike. It's always great to catch up with you and see what you're doing. We'll do it again in a couple years because you'll probably still be a pro skier. So, pro skier based, Solomon pays you to be a professional skier. Does anybody else pay you to ski?
Yes. Hester Gloves?
Ooh, do you read about them recently?
No.
This whole...
What?
And did you read about Solomon lately?
Yes, I was there when it got announced.
Jesus, yeah, they're going to be like owned by a Chinese company, which is nothing wrong with that, but it's just crazy. And then Hestra is really worried about these import taxes that the U.S. government is doing. It's going to significantly make their expensive gloves even more expensive, so they're worried.
Yeah, that kind of sucks.
And then, yeah, the whole Solomon thing, what's your take on that?
It's happening all around us. I was sponsored by Whistler Blackcomb for 20 years. I was their main ambassador for the resort. And then all of a sudden Vail buys them, and that went away real quick.
How's Vail treating you? They help you out at all with anything?
Not too much, no.
Okay.
But you see it happening everywhere in the world. And I don't like it. I don't like this mass conglomeration. It doesn't do a lot for your community, I'll say, and the good feelings and some of the values that I hold high. But, it's money.
Yeah.
It's money. In the end, it's money.
Well, hopefully the brands won't change significantly, but I don't think the deal's been finalized. It was just like $5.5 billion put on the table, and I think that was a really good deal if Amer wanted to sell.
Yeah, and as a member of the board of directors, that's a tough deal to turn down.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the one thing I'm kind of holding out for is that The Chinese, they don't have a lot of experience running these kinds of brands, especially in Europe or North America. And fingers crossed, hopefully that if they do buy Ammer, that they'll let the brands kind of run the way they've run. I mean, the brands are generally successful, so hopefully they won't mess with something that sort of works.
I hope they change all the logos and fonts and make everything totally different than anything we've ever known.
So that was time with Mike Douglas, and that dude has done more for skiing behind the scenes than almost anyone. The only person that I can think of that did more was Shane McConkey. While I'm sure I'm missing out on others, I know Hoji has had a lot of impact on ski development. I really can't say that anyone's had more of an impact than Mike Douglas. The body of work that he has created so far for Salomon is something that no one else can touch. Anyways, Mike is one of those people that is cool for what he has done, not for who he is. And that's not saying he's not a cool guy, but when you meet Mike Douglas off the hill, he comes off as a pretty cookie-cutter Canadian. There's no aura that he puts off that makes you think he could possibly have the nickname The Godfather, a nickname that people know him for globally. But he is the Godfather, and when you look at him ski over the years, he has changed the game with the equipment, the tricks, and everything that goes around it. And skiing has been really good to Mike. He has a great house in Whistler, and that happens to be where his company headquarters are, which is kind of strange for me. I mean, the offices are in a different wing as the company, but as the company has grown, there are people who have commutes to Mike Douglas's house. And if they work late, they are working late in Mike Douglas's house. Strange to me, but whatever. It's kind of like co-working with someone every day at their house. Anyways, Mike Douglas is an absolute legend who listens to the podcast a lot and lets me know when he likes certain parts that he thinks are cool. Mike would want you to subscribe to the podcast as well, so I'm going to tell you how to do it because it's really easy. Search for the POW Movement in Apple Podcasts, iTunes, or whatever. Click on the POW Movement graphic, scroll down to where you see the stars, and click 5 stars. It's that easy. You can review me there too, but that takes a little bit longer, and that's going above and beyond the call of duty. Before I head out, please sign up for my newsletter on thepowellmovement.com. It's that annoying pop-up window that shows up when you go to my site. There, I'll eventually be sending out updates on who's coming on the show and giveaways. I have a stacked lineup and will start revealing it on that newsletter. Finally, I want to thank you for listening to the show and thank my sponsors, Evo, Rescue Water, the 10 Barrel Brewery, Outdoor Research, and Spy Optic for making the show happen. Have a great week, everyone.